Hi, everyone. This is Caitlin from grassfedgirl.com, and we're so excited today. We have Michelle Hearn. She's from at Run Eat Meat Repeat on Instagram. Say that 3 times fast. She's a registered dietitian, and she has been doing carnivore for a while, and she has really helped her running. She's a big runner. She was very a big runner, so she'll tell us all about that. So not just a 5K-er, but somebody who is a really elite athlete. So we're going to talk to her all about being her background, being an RD, and the running and how she got into carnivore. So welcome, Michelle. I'm really excited to have
Yeah. Gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled. I followed
you.
your work, so this is really awesome.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. So you're in Oregon, is that right?
Yeah, well, I live in Vancouver, Washington, so
Oh,
right
okay.
outside of Portland, Oregon. I actually work in Portland and do a lot of my running
Oh,
out in Portland.
okay.
It's like 20 minutes away.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I used to live in San Francisco for 10 years, so
Oh, wow. So you're on the
uh,
West Coast. It's
yeah. And so tell us your story about what you were doing before, and then what made you get interested in carnivore.
Yeah, wow. Well, I hope you don't mind if I kind of back up
Oh,
to the
yeah.
very, very beginning. Okay, so I'm originally from Texas, originally from Plano, Texas. I'm the youngest of four girls. And so growing up was pretty challenging. My mom is bipolar, so I grew up with a mom that, had a mental disorder. And certainly back then it wasn't well understood. Certainly as an adult, I can understand the dynamics of that, but didn't as a child. And so by the time I was 11, my mom was always on some kind of different diet. She's very lean, very thin, but very obsessed with, losing weight, as a lot of women are still nowadays. And I actually had a pretty serious eating disorder. When I was 12 years old, I was almost 5 feet tall. I was about 4'11" and a half, and I weighed about 57 pounds.
Wow.
So I went through treatment. I was in inpatient treatment for 60 days in Wickenburg, Arizona at Remuda Ranch. And that was kind of my first real exposure to a lot of to what the dietetic world is and nutrition education. I remember I was, once again, I was really sick, 57 pounds. When I got admitted to the hospital, my parents went to talk to the doctor and they told me like, hey, you need to stay here. I was in a separate room, and like any good 12-year-old, I didn't listen, and I kind of, followed after they went behind closed doors. I went to listen, and I heard the doctor tell my parents like, hey, this doesn't look good. Like there's a really good chance she's not going to survive this, and you need to be ready.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, that was the first time in my life I'd seen my father cry. Excuse me. And when my mom, came out of the room, she was crying as well. And I told her, I remember, at that point, I thought it was a lie, but I said, I'm going to get better and I'm going to be fine. And at this point, at 57 pounds, I had organ failure. I couldn't really walk very well. All my hair had fallen out. It was, you could count all of my ribs. Sorry, I'm going to get glass water. It was terrifying, and then and then for 60 days, as a 12-year-old, you don't see your parents. They drop you off at this place, and I was immediately put on a 24-hour tube feeding system and, refed that way. So this was also my first experience with kind of the medical profession. And I do want to say, I have a lot of strong opinions about the dietetics industry and the medical industry. But there are certain instances, I mean, I'm grateful because that actually saved my life. I was being refed at that time. And as I went through treatment and started to regain weight and started to feel better, it was my first time meeting with a dietitian. And her name, I won't say what her name was, but I didn't like her at all. I did not like her. I thought she was cold and she was mean. And I remember as a snarky 12-year-old, I told her, you know what? Someday I'm going to be a dietitian and I'm going to be a lot better than you.
Oh.
And to her credit, she said, sure, do it. And after treatment, when I came back home, I still struggled quite a bit, but my next oldest sister is only 14 months older than I am, and I really miss that relationship. I mean, anyone struggling with an eating disorder will tell you just push everybody away. It's hard to be that sick and have any close contact. So I started to, over that summer, spend more time with my sister and just kind of fell back into like eating, nourishing my body, taking care of my body. And so by the time I was 14, I was at a normal weight and doing significantly better. And so that is when I tried out for basketball, got cut from the basketball team, and my coach told me, okay, well, I'm going to enroll you in PE. And I just said, I felt like I'd come such a long way from being super sick to being this normal weight. And I said, like, isn't there anything else I could do, other sport? And she was like, well, there's this running thing, but most people don't like this running thing. And I'll give it a try. And I found that I just had a natural kind of knack for it. And I just loved it. Like I fell in love with just being able to kind of explore. And at that point, where I grew up, our 10th and 11th grade, our 11th and 12th grade was a separate building than our 9th and 10th. So you got to go run with the juniors and seniors. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I ended up doing really well. I won state as a sophomore, and things were going great. I started working at a smoothie place, so I was learning even more about like nutrition. I saw how people were utilizing protein and amino acids to like build muscle. And then when I was 17, I decided that, I heard about vegetarianism and how that can actually help you lose weight and help you run faster. And people were telling me, yeah, you really don't need much protein. And so I became a vegetarian. And
you can get it all in broccoli, right?
Exactly. All in broccoli and beans and lentils. And wow, if you look at bread that has this much protein, and on the surface, it made sense. Like, okay, I'm a runner. I'm trying to get a lot of carbohydrates into my body. Well, it makes sense that I would decrease my protein. So I significantly decreased my protein and fat. And what happened was I lost weight. And unfortunately, it kind of re-sparked some of those eating disorder tendencies that I had started to really move away from. And I ran, but this is the problem, and we can certainly talk more about this now that I'm a professional. When people go to vegetarianism or veganism, you often see an improvement. You see that kind of honeymoon phase because, all of a sudden you're flooding your body with glucose. So I was running great. And I had a coach at the time, a club coach that was, really focused on leanness. And so I was getting lean. Everything was going great until it wasn't. I ended up, my sophomore year, I had verbally committed to go run for Kansas State University. Super excited, going to get a scholarship. And I'm running and I finish a run and, I have my backpack on. I'm running late to class and I jumped off a curb and I felt something kind of shift in my hip. And I remember being like, oh man, did I fall? What's going on? And it didn't get better. And I'd never experienced pain like that. And so finally, we went and got an x-ray and I'd fractured my hip.
Oh my goodness.
I'm 18 and I had a hip fracture. And the doctor was like, we got to do a bone density scan. This is not good. And it turned out that I had the bone density of about a 70-year-old. And of course, at that time, I had stopped having periods when I went on the vegetarian. And that's terrifying, and of course I called up Kansas State and said, this is what's going on. And all of a sudden that offer was pulled off the table immediately. It was a really tough lesson as a young person. And I ended up getting up with a different coach who I would say he probably saved my running career. He was like, okay, we have to get you back to eating normally. I started eating a lot of meat again. I ended up walking on to the University of Arkansas and just had a really great experience there. I started, unfortunately, because of the bone density damage, it took several years to build that back up, and I had a second stress fracture my sophomore year of Arkansas that took a really long time to heal. It was in my left iliac crest. And so unfortunately I wasn't able to continue running there, but all of this kind of, these back and forth struggles really made me want to figure out like, okay, what is going on in my body? I had seen how nutrition had kind of destroyed my health and it kind of restored my health. And so I decided, like, as most young people who want to become dietitians do, we say, okay, we want to help people. We realize what the nutrition we're putting in our body matters. And so we, go through all the courses. To be a dietitian, you have to get your 4-year degree, you have to get into an internship, you have to sit for the exam. And then once you become a dietitian, the reality is it's a lot different than what you picture. You picture that you're going to talk to people, you're going to help them. How I started as a dietitian, I was very big on blood sugar stability. I was like, everybody can benefit from having stable blood sugar. It doesn't matter if you're diabetic, doesn't matter. So I tended to prescribe unprocessed carbohydrates, things that grow in the ground or on a tree. I used to say there's no cookie tree, cracker tree, bread tree, pasta tree, some type of protein and fat, and lots of vegetables. I was a huge advocate for vegetables. You couldn't get enough vegetables, in my opinion. Get your own garden. And I was often met with a lot of resistance just with that prescription. I was told, Michelle, pasta is fine, bread is fine, juice is fine. And I started to get really angry as a young dietitian because I was having older dietitians tell me that Coca-Cola in moderation was fine. It was all calories in, calories out. Donuts and, donut affected your body the same as say
An
like,
apple or something.
yeah, or even beef. And this is the one thing I prescribe, and this is why I've decided to write a book, because there is a profound physiological difference between how beef, how steak, how even chicken affects your body versus any type of carbohydrate. The process of breaking these two things down in your body is so phenomenally different. And that is where we've gone kind of wackadoodle in the dietetics and medical industry, is where we're doing a lot of things that don't align with human physiology,
Well, it's like, but they have a lot of science courses, and it seems like a dietitian, if anyone, would understand that difference in the way it's metabolized.
I honestly think most people do. Most dietitians do. We are still taught that our license requires us to teach. It used to be the goofy food pyramid. Now it's the goofy MyPlate. That is what we have to teach. If you come and you say like, look, I don't think this is a good idea for this particular individual. You're really not allowed to teach that. And that's the big problem that I have, because one of the biggest things I see, I work in 2 different hospitals. I work in a psychiatric hospital, and I work in just like acute care. I do oncology, med surg, diabetes. If somebody comes in with severe diabetes, prescribing them a consistent carbohydrate diet and then dosing them with insulin is the equivalent to consistently setting your house on fire and then, trying to put it out with a fire extinguisher. Why don't you just stop setting your house on fire? Like carbohydrates, your body can no longer utilize and process those carbohydrates. And unfortunately, most patients don't understand. They're like, oh, my blood sugar is great. I have great blood sugar control. But that's because you're using so much insulin. Insulin is a powerful storage hormone that has lots of effects on your body. We're not supposed to be utilizing this. But
It's super expensive too, right?
Yeah, and it has lots of effects. I mean, people, by the time I see most patients, they don't just have diabetes. They have diabetes, they have heart failure, they have chronic kidney disease, they have depression, they have so many different things. And the biggest thing that I can see in most patients is, one, they are eating a phenomenal amount of carbohydrates, or they're taking in, I should say, not always eating, a lot of it's drinking. They're taking in a very small amount of protein, and most of the fat they take in is from vegetable sources. Sorry, something just came across.
Vegetables.
Yeah, vegetable oils. I pointed out actually in our psychiatric facility, I said, look, I'm a long distance runner, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. I don't think that this patient population should be having more carbohydrates for breakfast than I have for an entire day. And I was told to stay in my lane. That's what the food pyramid says. That's what we're subsidized for. I sent out an article to our psychiatric, our main doctors about, I had two patients in a row that had low cholesterol, just like statistically low, like their labs came back, and they both had drug resistant depression. And I was like, oh, I've seen this. I pulled up the clinical trials that a lot of times when you have drug-resistant depression, if your cholesterol is low, you might actually need exogens. You might actually need to take some type of cholesterol supplement, you know? And I was once again told, like, hey, you know what? This is not, you don't need to be sending these articles out. You need to easy does it type of thing.
Stick with the line.
Yep, you got to stay in line. And one thing you'll learn about me, especially if you follow me, is I don't like to stay in line. I've seen too much suffering, you know, and I feel so lucky and so blessed. And I'll even talk a little bit more about my running and kind of how that has transitioned. I think, as you do, we have information that can literally save people's lives. We can't be silent, you know. For a while I was like, you know what, I'm gonna find a different career. I can't keep doing this because I'm literally not helping anybody if I continue to teach this goofiness that doesn't work, you know. And I before I practiced in Portland, we used to live in Boulder, and that was my first clinical job. I was a very young dietitian, and I was a little more brash, and I was immediately told, like, you can't be that honest. I had a woman with chronic kidney disease. She was, and this is another thing. We're not seeing this in people 80, well, we are in 80, 90, but I'm seeing this in people as young as their 30s. You know, I had a woman in her 30s who had such severe kidney failure from just this obesity and over consuming carbohydrates that when I talked to her, you know, I said, look, this is a big problem. And she looked at me and she said, you know, I'd rather die than change my diet. And I said, well, you're on your way.
Yeah.
And you will not believe the trouble. I got suspended for saying that. And I even came to my boss and said, look, maybe this wasn't the right thing to say, or maybe I didn't say it compassionately, but here's the studies that show the mortality rate with her labs. Now, I worry that we've lost the ability to be brutally honest with people. I also believe, I had a doctor in Boulder tell me, Michelle, we have to assume that people will not change their diet or not exercise. That's why we're giving them insulin. That's why we're giving them prescriptions.
What are you doing then? What is your job then?
Our job is to keep the pharmaceutical industry running strong and get insurance reimbursement. And the Academy of Nutrition is not going to like that. But when you're sponsored by we're not sponsored by Coca-Cola. We're sponsored by the Coca-Cola Institute of Wellness.
Oh, yes, I've heard about that. So I want to make sure we don't get off track. I want to finish your story. So I think you were in college, you were finishing up college, and then what happened?
I actually did my last 2 years because, you know, I wasn't running in Arkansas. So I did my last 2 years totally online. And because, you know, I wasn't running in college competitively, I started to, like, what's next, you know? And I was like, well, I'm just going to run a marathon. And I found out that the Olympic qualifying time, the race to get into the Olympics, you had to run under 2 hours. I think at that time it was 2 hours and 45 minutes. And I was like, well, you know, maybe that's doable. Maybe if I trained. And I ran my first marathon and it was a nightmare. I heard it was terrible, but I liked the challenge. And so I started following just kind of the traditional advice. You know, I read every book I could find, and it said you need to fill your muscles with, you know, with glucose, with glycogen. And so I ate a very high carbohydrate diet. I mean, I was eating at some points as a younger person up to 500 grams of carbs a day. I wish I could probably break that down for you. I mean, it's the equivalent of, you know, 2 or 3 cups of apple juice, 2 or 3 cups of rice, a couple bagels, granola bars, candy. And for a while, I was actually performing okay. You know, I was performing pretty well. I think a lot of you know, when you're in your 20s, you can get away with a little bit more indiscretion. But I had severe anxiety and depression. I was struggling so badly. My energy, I'd feel good, and then I'd eat, you know, over 800 calories in the morning, and within 2 hours, I'd feel kind of dizzy, kind of shaky. Um, Sorry. Um,
So you feel like you're going to pass out if you didn't eat like really often?
yeah, I was constantly craving carbohydrates and craving sugar. And in the first time in my life, I was actually started to gain a little bit of weight. I'd always been pretty lean. And so, you know, I started running more because that's what you do, right? You just have to exercise more. That's what everybody tells you, exercise more. And I started to eat a little less. And, you know, my depression it got worse. I got to the point where I stopped hanging out with people. I just was, I questioned every situation. I started to, question what foods I was eating. I was having this unhealthy relation. Should I eat oatmeal? Should I eat bagels? Back and forth, back and forth. And, honestly, it
It's
continued like that.
it's the same thing.
Yeah, it continued like that for years. I met my now wife, she, friend, girlfriend, and then fiance in 2009. And that, like, changed my world. Obviously, the greatest person I've ever known, and such a wonderful support. And she's seen me through, a lot of stuff. But yeah, during that time, especially our first few years together, my anxiety was really bad. And I'm thankful for her support and her love. So, but I did a lot of different things. I think, what a lot of people do. I got on medication. I went to, therapy. I went to groups. I tried to do all this different stuff. And it's interesting that it didn't really occur to me that, like, all this food I'm putting in my body is causing a lot of problems. And so fast forward to, I got an opportunity in 2014 to work with Generation UCAN. I don't know if you're familiar with that product. It's a slow burning carbohydrate. And it was really unique. I like it a lot. It basically, it was developed for kids with glycogen storage disease. Basically, when they go to bed, their liver doesn't release glycogen, so they can actually wake up with life-threatening low blood sugar. Very
Oh,
rare. Affects only like 1% of kids. And so this carbohydrate, basically all it is, it's non-GMO corn. It's gone through a 40-hour cooking and drying process. They just use heat, water, pressure. And it takes this, glucose is a really linear molecule, and it makes it really big and branched. It's kind of like when you cook something, it kind of, starches. And so you take in the product, and it actually breaks down nice and slowly. It's the first carbohydrate that I'm aware of that doesn't give you an insulin response. And so 100 calories of the carbohydrate actually allows you to have up to 90 minutes of physical activity. At least this is when I heard about it. This is what I was told, and I actually sent a letter to the company. I was like, "This is garbage. I'm not going to be able to take 100 calories of a carb and run for 90 minutes." And so they sent me a couple packets and said, "Give it a whirl." And I tried it, and I was so impressed. And I actually went and looked at their clinical trials, and I was like, I'm on board. I want to, because I'd always been a big fan of blood sugar stability, and I had seen that patients I worked with do much better when they kept their blood sugar stable, kind of common sense. And so I got to work with UCAN. I got to travel with them and speak about the product, and I'm still a huge fan of it. I mean, anything that can, keep your blood sugar stable. I actually think it's a great tool for the ketogenic community, or people especially transitioning from a really high carbohydrate diet. It's kind of a nice bridge. Yeah, so I did that for over a year. I would have loved to keep doing that, but at the time, I was traveling 22 days a month. I'd leave, and my fiance was mad because I was gone. Then she'd get in a routine. I'd come home. I mess up her routine. She's mad that I'm home. And I was traveling all over, living in Portland, going to, Detroit, and I was like, I can't keep doing this.
yeah, traveling's really hard on a relationship.
Yes, and on running too. So at the time I was running probably 60 to 70 miles a week. I, you know, I ran, up to this point, I've run 11 marathons. I did my last marathon in 2017, and I was less than 10 minutes away from qualifying for the Olympic standard. That's been my kind of life goal. But then things kind of shifted in 2017. I was training really hard, and I was used to muscle pain. You're used to muscle soreness. But I started having a lot of pain, like disproportionate to what you should have from running. And so I, kind of freaked out a little bit, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I just need to make sure my glycogen stores are full. So I did what most people do, and I doubled down on a really bad idea. I was already eating about 300 grams of carbs. And so I started eating about 400. And the pain got to the point where I was waking up in the middle of the night. My legs hurt so bad. I actually remember one night waking up at 2 a.m, taking ibuprofen, couldn't fall back asleep. I drove to 7-Eleven, got 2 big bags of ice, put them in the bathtub, laying in the bath, and I'm just sitting there thinking, what am I doing? What is going on? This isn't sustainable. I would have to take 2, sometimes 3 days completely off of running after a workout to recover. I no longer looked forward to running. Of course, as running was such a stress relief for me, I I started to feel down again. I was, things were kind of started to spiral. And at the same time, this was back in April of 2019, I lost my job. I was working at a psychiatric facility being the dietitian, and it was a for-profit one. And they brought in a entire crew and got rid of the entire dietary department. No questions asked. See you later. And so, here I am, in pain, don't have a job. And then I started resorting to some pretty unhealthy coping mechanisms. I started to feel better drinking. We need to talk actually cutting. That is something that it's hard to talk about because there's a lot of shame attached to that. But there is a dopamine release that happens, when you do that. And so I resorted to self-injury. And
I think it's all. I mean, a lot of things we do are self-injury. That's just more apparent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even the things we do with food, is whether you're binging or whether you're starving yourself. There's so many different things, and that's a fantastic point. We're doing to try to cope.
Or self-sabotage our life or something.
Yeah, you're doing ridiculous things with friends or relationships or finances and other things like that.
Sleeping around or
absolutely.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
And I mean, all of it can get out of control really quick.
Absolutely. And so at this point, I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm not running. The Olympic dreams is, and I had no ambitions of being, I should say that, the top 3 going to Olympics. I just wanted to make it to the trials race. I said, I'm done. I can't, this is causing my body too much harm. And I'm not showing up as a partner. I'm not showing up as a human. And so I cried for about a day and a half. And then I decided, like, you know what, I'm just going to run for fun. And at this point, I'm still eating a super high carb diet. I decided I'm just going to go run, 3 or 4 miles. And I had done, 18, 20 mile runs without an issue. And I ran for 2 miles and I just started having a cold sweat and I had to walk home. And that's when I decided, like, okay, something dramatic has to change, something big. And, I was familiar with low carbohydrate, but I didn't think it was something that I could ever do with running, with my lifestyle. And so I started researching low carb runners. And what popped up was Zach Bitters. Zach Bitters is the current 100-mile world record holder. And it said, ultra runner follows a low carb diet. And I was like, no way. And so I started researching it and I Googled a bunch of articles about it. And I found his website and I emailed him. I was like, man, you got to tell me more about this. Like, and he's a super nice guy. He emailed me back right away and said he'd love to talk more. And so I was just like fascinated, like, oh my goodness. And then I started researching, glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose versus the breakdown of ketones. And this is something we're not taught as dietitians, is that there's so much oxidative stress that happens when you're burning glucose and burning glucose all the time. You're creating lots of free radicals. You're creating potential for damage. Where ketones tend not only to keep your blood sugar and your energy stable, which is going to keep cortisol low, it actually is a very, clean burning process, And so my only goal, and I said, you know what, I'm going to just go keto. This sounds great, was to reduce inflammation. And before I went, decided to do this, I was researching a little bit more about Zach, and I saw this crazy guy named Sean Baker, this crazy guy that followed this all meat diet. And I was like, that's nuts. You're going to die. This guy, how has he not died yet? And then as I looked and researched it, I was like, holy cow, is everything I've ever been taught about nutrition totally wrong? Is everything about fiber, about vitamin C? And as I went back through, because I'm someone, and I encourage anybody to do this, is like, man, be your own advocate, scientist, research, ask questions. And I went through, what are our RDAs? What are our recommended dietary allowances based on? And it was like, oh my gosh, I've been magnesium deficient forever. Well, what takes magnesium is all this sugar and all this carbohydrates, I had had issues with other macronutrients, iron, vitamin B12. And I was like, they're being blocked by all this fiber and all this stuff. And so I was like, well, screw this. I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna eat meat. I'm gonna eat meat and fat, and it's gonna be great. And so I told my wife, I said, okay, look, this is what I want to do. And also remember that she's been with me through depression, through eating disorders. She was like, nah, no way. She's a big meat advocate. But she's like, we are not going low carb. You're not doing this. This is going to make you sick. This is eating disordered. This is restrictive. I cannot get behind this. And so I said, okay, well, what if we try try to like, well, and so, I do what most people do. And like, well, I'll just do this when I'm at work and see how it works. How can I tiptoe around this at home, right? And she was mad.
You're sliding your veggies in the trash.
Yeah. It's like maybe we have chickens, maybe they can get us to the chicky noodles. And so the first week she was mad. She's like, I'm not cooking. She loves to cook, so I'm not cooking for you. I'm not doing this. And then by about the second week, she said, I'm 100% sure this isn't going to work. So you'll quit, and I'll just deal with this till you quit. And I said, look, I'm not married to anybody but you. If this doesn't work, if there's a better way to do this, then I'll switch. But something really dramatic happened about the third week, about the second and a half week I'd been doing this, is one, my muscle soreness was almost gone. I just thought like, oh, I'm not running as much, but my anxiety, like I would go through the workday and I was just calm. My energy was stable. And you start to make excuses like, oh, well, maybe it just hasn't been as stressful of a week. I started to sleep well. And I'd say by the fourth week, my wife like sat down with me and was like, okay, so I'm not sure if I like this yet, but I like how you're feeling. She's like, I've been with you for 10 years and I've never seen your anxiety so low. She's like, you're happy. And she's like, you're starting to annoy me because you have too much energy. And I was like, well, and I was like, all right, well, I'm going to start to run a little bit again, just a couple miles because my body felt so good. And I said, well, if I run just a few miles, I might not be able to do it because I'm low carb. I can't run much low carb. And so I went out for a run and I came back in like an hour. I just felt so good. I just kept going. And that's when it like clicked. I was like, this is going to change my life. And this is going to change a lot of people's lives. So I immediately got on the emailed Zach Bitter's the 100-mile world record holder. And I said, hey, I got a dream. Do you want to coach me? And, he emailed me back and was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I've never run over a marathon. I want to run 50 miles. And he was great. We called. He's now my coach.
Wow.
And I told my wife, God bless this woman. Because remember, she's seen me struggle to the point where I couldn't run 2 miles. I'm waking up in the middle of the night, going to 7-Eleven to get ice to sit in a bathtub. And I said, okay, now that I'm doing so well, how about I run 50 miles?
She was like, I've had enough.
She said, all right, you do that. I want an RV. I said, deal. I don't know. Maybe we're going to win the lottery and we'll be able to afford that. But, and this was back in November, and so she said, okay, look, you get to give it 3 months. If you're still running strong in 3 months, we'll register, we'll pay for it. And so we found a 50-miler in Canada it's loop course, not too tough for your first one, 6-mile loops. And I was totally open. I was like, I'm so new to this. Anyone who talked to me, I was like, I'm very new. This is what's working. My inflammation is low. My energy is great. And so I just kept going. And people were asking me like, oh my God, like, aren't you hungry? Aren't you craving sugar? And I would tell anybody the first couple of weeks are a little rough because you're transitioning, about the second week, I had a gnarly headache. And I would tell anybody, man, make sure you get those electrolytes. I wish I had done that. I didn't know. So if I had a little more salt, I drove home that first week and I was like, oh, the traffic lights hurt, everything hurt. But once your body like adjusts, I had a really pivotal moment when I went to the grocery store. This was about a month in, and my wife was like, hey, we need coffee. We do drink coffee. Go to the grocery store, walking through the aisles, grab coffee. And I walked out. And when I walked out, I was like, I just had this moment. Oh my God, Going to the grocery store used to provoke so much anxiety. Going down the granola bar aisle, like all these different choices and all these different carbs and all this, should I sugar? Like I just had such an unhealthy relationship with food that it was an anxiety provoking experience. And now I'm so satiated. I'm so happy and full. And I get to eat and live. I mean, that's what we all should do as humans. We should be able to put food in our body and continue on our day.
Yeah,
But
it's not
most
like not like just all we can think about.
Exactly. And that's what it was. I would literally bargain with myself. I'd be sitting at work. I'd eat, a bunch of oatmeal and a bunch of like, apples and juice and stuff. And this would be 8 o'clock. And then by 10, I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, okay, I got to make it till 10:30 because it just doesn't, I got to give myself a break before I put more calories in my body. And now, yeah, it's totally different. Now I eat, 3, maybe 4 times a day on super long run days, but I'm full, I'm satiated. And this is because I'm now eating in a way that aligns with human physiology. Nature is smart. You can't outdo nature. I tell people currently we have 5 chickens, a dog, and a tortoise. We go out of our way to make sure the tortoise has, the special lettuce and grass. We don't feed species a non-species diet. We wouldn't give our tortoise chocolate or, high oxalate foods because it would kill it. But as humans, our bodies are designed to run off meat and fat, but we give it all kinds of stuff. And when it goes awry, we're like, oh, I don't know why.
We're taught that we can basically eat a little bit of everything, and it's like maybe not. Um,
Moderation is terrible. I would say that moderation doesn't work. Moderation is a concept that was constructed, in my opinion, by companies trying to sell you their product. As the Dietetics Association, sponsored by Coca-Cola, I had someone tell me in high up in the regime. I shouldn't use that word, but high up in the board that it's not like, Michelle, it's not like we're telling people to drink Coca-Cola. And I said, yeah, but you're not telling them not to. That's all they want. All they want is you being like, oh, well, have it once in a while. It's fine. It's not fine. It's not good for the human. You don't, when your need for carbohydrates is zero,
yeah.
consuming high fructose corn syrup is going to cause problems. And we need to start having a more honest conversation about that and about, what we're feeding our children, what we're feeding our elderly, what we're feeding people in the hospital.
Well,
It really needs to
that's
change.
that's the part that's so scary. It's like, oh, like people like you and me, we can control what we eat, but I mean, if you're in jail or you're in a home or you're in a WIC or whatever, you don't have a choice. You're just whatever is given to you is like, I mean, I know there's some prisoners that sued because they had soy poisoning because they were just getting fed like meatless burgers or something. Like that's all they could have.
It's really sad. Our elderly population, I see that we see so many people in the hospital come in from nursing homes and come in from, care facilities. And, when you're looking at what they're eating, I mean, they maybe get 20 grams of protein a day, maybe, but they'll get, 250, 300 grams of carbohydrates because they're cheap, because we subsidize a lot of that stuff, a lot of soy and
They're
corn.
easy to ship and they stay good.
Yeah,
Like it's easier they're shelf stable a lot of times. Uh,
yeah.
but I was wondering, so you went straight into carnivore or did you do some keto first?
I went straight into carnivore. I was about to do the ketogenic diet, but when I saw that, I was like, well, I really like meat, and it seemed to make sense. And I also, one of the biggest things that I thought that was a little bit different from keto to carnivore was the amount of protein you could have. And I was worried. My muscles had so much damage at that point. I was in so much pain. It made sense to me that, like, well, if I eat quite a bit more protein, then I'm going to hopefully rebuild my muscles. And then for me, for running, you can get plenty of carbohydrates via gluconeogenesis, the process of making carbohydrates from protein. Your body can do that easily. We don't teach that either, right? But you don't need carbohydrates. You can make all you need from the protein.
Well,
And so I think that's actually okay. Sorry.
trying to limit protein seems very unnatural when I was doing keto. It just seemed really like, oh, I should be counting this protein. That just seemed like against, it just didn't make sense, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's maybe one of the beautiful things of carnivore is you don't have to count. Oh my God, as a young person and someone with an eating disorder, I had Excel sheets with calories of this and that. And I still have people tell me like, oh, how many calories does this have? Calories. I don't want to hear about calories. Calories, it doesn't, no other species counts calories. And it actually was a little scary for me when I first started carnivore because I found that I felt like I was eating a lot, and certainly my coworkers were letting me know that I was eating a strange amount. Like, are you sure it's good for you to be eating a pound of beef for breakfast? They had a buffet once. It was a Christmas thing they were giving us at Legacy, the hospital I work at. And they didn't have beef, but they had turkey. And I was like, oh, cool. And so all I did was I got, a big thing of turkey. And the woman was like, are you feeding a bear? And I was like, yeah, her name's Michelle. I think you have to be okay being a little weird.
Yeah,
This is,
exactly.
I do think my wife was listening to a podcast with Paul Saladino and Michaela Peterson, and Paul thinks this is going to be more widespread in 3 years. I think that's a little ambitious. I think Michaela thinks more like 30 years. I'm more with her. We're ahead of the curve with this. This is when you align with human physiology, you're going to heal. And our healthcare system is in a crisis. We are people, more people in this country now are overweight or obese than are normal weight. We're having everything from digestive disorders to, diabetes to dementia to heart failure. And, and the number one cause of disability. Do you know what the number one cause of disability in this country is?
What?
Depression.
Okay.
Depression. And we're seeing it rise exponentially with our children and so much, I truly believe, is tied to what you're putting in your body. And you nailed it, that we're doing a disservice. Our people who are low socioeconomic status and disenfranchised, in prison, in hospitals, we should be feeding you meat and fat, things that can nourish you, things that can keep your mind stable. And instead, we feed you tons of carbohydrates. And when your body goes crazy, we throw tons of prescriptions at you.
It's all backwards. Um, so where do you see yourself going with your career and how, like, now that you have this new information, like, how are you gonna, it's like cognitive dissonance. How are you?
Yeah, I know it's driving me nuts. There's times that I just want to tear my hair out. Someone asked me that on social media, like, how do you do this? And I'm like, I don't know. My wife would tell you I used to come home like every other day, like, I gotta quit. Um, I think I do think we need dietitians in the workforce still that have this view. And I think honestly, I'm not the only one. I think a lot of dietitians feel this, or maybe not the direction of carnivore, but feel like, look, we got to go low carb.
Or real,
But
at least real food.
yeah, real food. So, um, at least for now, I'm gonna try to stay in the hospital system and continue to fight that fight. I'm someone who's in there advocating for change. As I shared with you, I am writing a book. I think it's overdue. I mean, we have so many great books out. Sean's book is fantastic. I know Paul is writing a book. I actually saw you have a book. I need to check out. But it's going to be called The Dietitian's Dilemma. It's going to be, what I see and where we need to go. Because what the frustrating thing is we have clinical trials, we have articles, we have information that tells you how great a higher protein, high fat, carnivore-based diet is in reversing a lot of disease. But those articles have been kind of pushed away, you know.
Well, I think as you go along, and I think that your book sounds amazing. That's a great title, and I think the opportunities will come for you. I mean, I know my friend Diana Rogers. I met her years ago. She wasn't even an RD then, and now she's making a movie, and things can happen that you can't see right now, but opportunities are out there, especially for people with traditional training, because you give legitimacy to the movement. So,
Yeah.
um, the holistic people like me can't work in the system, in the traditional system or whatever. So tell us your typical day of eating. Like, what do you eat in the morning and then before your run? And I know you do eat a little bit of carbs
I
still.
do. I do. I'm not anti-carb. I have found that, eliminating most fruits and vegetables has actually been really helpful to me. Once again, very counterintuitive from what we learned. But um, so, Zach's my coach, Zach Bitters, and he calls carbohydrates rocket fuel. Like they should be used sparingly for certain circumstances. So if I'm running less than 90 minutes, my carbohydrate intake for the day is going to be pretty low. It's probably going to be, definitely less than 50 grams, sometimes less than 25 grams. But so I'll give you an example of kind of like I guess a higher carb and a low carb day. So I ran 30 miles this past Saturday. Um, Woke up in the morning, for my coffee. I get a thing of coffee. We like strong dark coffee, and I mix about a teaspoon and a half of butter in it. Blend it. Tastes really good. And I do use Generation UCAN, the slow burning carb. I had 100 calories, so it's just one big scoop of it. Mix it in water, drink it, drive to the trails. During my run, I had it's like a gel. It's not the goo, but it's basically like a dextrose. But so for 4 hours though, I had a total of 200 calories. So most people, they tell you you need 40, you need 30. What is it? 30 carbs every half hour. That's very silly. I'm pretty fat adapted too. So yeah. So after that, ran. And when I'm done running, this is something that is totally different than what I used to do. I'd finish a run and I'd immediately go slam a bunch of carbs. So I finished my 30-mile run. It was cold. It was rainy, and I changed. Drove home. My priority is protein. My body is beat up. And by this time, because it's 4 hours, it's like 12:30, and I really haven't eaten much. And so I have about a pound of ground beef. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of butter, extra tallow. The priority is protein and fat at that point. No carbs, because at that point too, I'm also trying to keep inflammation as low as possible. My body is pretty inflamed after pounding it for 4 hours of running. And you know what? That usually will keep me full for quite a while. We had a event thing that night, and so they had prime rib, and I was actually really excited. I actually had a beef patty in my jacket pocket because I wasn't sure if they were going to serve it to you, and it wasn't going to be enough, but it was a buffet. So I was like, oh, sweet. So then I had probably a whole another pound of prime rib, and they had some steamed carrots. So I like, for my vegetables, I'll have a little bit of steamed carrots. Yeah, so that's like a long run day. Actually, I might sometimes on days I recover, I don't run as much. I might actually eat a little bit more just because I have more time too.
Yeah.
So like a
But
typical like, oh, yeah,
that's
good.
such a low carb day for a runner, though. I mean, it's like very, very
Oh, it's
low.
totally counterintuitive, right? Like
Uh,
if you had told me this, like literally, if you told me this a year ago, I would have told you you were making stuff up and you need to take a hike. This can never work. But what I'm telling you and what I'm telling people, and I would tell anybody this is, you know, we can have great articles and we can have my testimony and other testimonies, but until you actually experience it, it doesn't really mean anything. Now that I'm experiencing this, it's completely changed my life. When I ran marathons on high carb, I would run a marathon. I'd be out for a week. I could not run. Walking hurt for a week. So I ran 30 miles Saturday. And then I went and ran 8 miles Sunday, like that could have never happened before. My body is healing. I told my wife, I'm like Wolverine, it's like your body is healing so quickly. It's like, it's phenomenal. And I'm not young, I'm not like a 21-year-old kiddo. I'm 36. So, and I can only attribute it to, I'm not having all that stress from all the breakdown of glucose and glycolysis, which is a relatively inflammatory process. So that has been eliminated. I'm having an influx and a significant amount of amino acids. My body, those protein and amino acids are able to build. And, my blood sugar is so stable because I'm not having those blood sugar spikes, that my cortisol is super, super low. And it plays off itself, so my body feels good physically. I'm much happier mentally. I'm sleeping better. But yeah, it is really low carbohydrate. And, if you're a newer runner or someone, who's coming off a super high carbohydrate diet and you're not fat adapted at all, you may have to kind of ease into it, because I do have a higher carb days. Like I said, on days I run less, I'll wake up, I won't have UCAN, I'll just have coffee and butter. But then I'll come back and I'll have blueberries. That's one of my carbs of choice. I'll have a couple blueberries. I'll have half a pound of meat. Then for lunch, I'll have about 3/4 a pound of some type of, it's usually ground beef. We just got like an eighth of a cow, so we got a lot of ground beef. I have chickens, so we have a couple eggs. And then, for a snack, sometimes I do have peanut butter. I have a big thing of peanut butter sometimes for a snack. And then at night, my wife does make some sourdough bread. So once in a while, probably a couple times a week, I'll have a piece of sourdough with butter. And I do have a glass of wine or drink an IPA once or twice a week. So, I'm not a saint, and I'm not a strict,
Well,
carnivore person.
it may change over time too, or you may, I mean, you may become less like wanting those things. Or you
Yeah.
may, who knows? Once you get into it, sometimes you can change your mind or. So let's give some people if they're new or maybe they're just having a hard time, give them some words of encouragement about getting started with this kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, I think the most important thing with this lifestyle is you have to give it a little bit of time. We are such an instant gratification society. It's like I need to know something, boom, I Google it. I want to feel better, boom, I eat sugar. So really buy into the process. Say like, okay. And I know a lot of people say this, but finding out like, why do you want to do this? Like, are you diabetic? Are you depressed? Are you don't like your life? Like whatever your reason is, for me, my only reason at that time was just my body hurt everywhere and I wanted to hurt less. So just be willing to give yourself, for some people thinking 30 days, that's a long time, but just say, okay, 2 weeks. I'm going to give myself 2 weeks. Anybody can do anything for 2 weeks and eat enough. I think especially as women, we're taught like, oh, you need these tiny 3-ounce, deck of cards, portions, hand size. No, you eat enough. You eat like, I remember I kind of scared myself once when I ate a whole pound of beef and I was still hungry. I waited 20 minutes. I'm like, all right. So I made another half a pound. Your body, I believe, especially as females, and I'm sure there's many men out there that have done this as well. We're so deficient in amino acids. We've restricted our bodies for so long. We've counted calories and restricted. Once you start giving your body a lot of amino acids, it may take a while. And you may need to eat way more than you think you need for a little while. So that would be a big one. And and keep things that you like. Like we cooked a bunch of bacon strips, to have as snacks. And I also had the idea, I think having the idea that like, what? Just the openness. Like if this doesn't work, I'm willing to go back to whatever. Because sometimes I think if you say like, I'm never eating this again, like your mind immediately is like ice cream, ice cream.
Yeah.
So just saying like, okay, I'm really committing to this. And if it doesn't work, I can eat whatever I want. Like I still believe that. Like if I want chocolate cake, I could eat it. But I told my wife, I'm like, I can never go back. I feel so good. Like you just don't want it anymore. You know what? I've been down that road. I've been down that instant pleasure, and you eat something sugary, you feel great for 5 minutes, and then you have all these auto immune reactions in your body. So
somebody with an eating disorder, do you find it restrictive?
no, and this is the thing that's like so counterintuitive, and this is the thing I'm going to try to really dedicate some time in my book is if you're looking at it from the outside, and I've already had people email me, criticize, whatever, it appears restrictive. Anything where you're limiting appears restrictive. But I go back to you're being full, you're actually, I feel like for the first time in my body, I'm at peace with food. I've never been at peace with food. I've been constantly thinking about it, worrying about it. You open the fridge, you stare, and to the point where you start to cry. Like, I don't know what to eat. I never feel that anymore. I get to eat as much as I want all the time. Eating is now a part of my life versus dominating my thoughts. And someone who's struggled with an eating disorder, anybody watching this, you'll feel that. You'll know what it's like to have, You go through your work day, you go through if you have a family or kids, but you're always thinking about it. It's always in your mind. And, I got to the point where, on this diet, I don't think about it. I don't, and I even started to have a more peaceful relationship with my body. I used to think like, God, if I could be thinner, oh, I would run better. I'd like myself more. I look in the mirror now and I'm like, all right, I'm doing okay. And it's I haven't felt that way since I was 12, before my eating disorder. So I, I, I realize it will appear restrictive. And I realize, there's this whole dogma that says we need to eat intuitively. But I sincerely believe, and I would love to have a dialogue and conversation with somebody if they feel differently, that you cannot eat intuitively on the standard American diet. You cannot eat carbohydrates intuitively because how they affect your system, because you're going to have a blood sugar spike, crash. You're going to have, ghrelinine's happening, cortisol's happening. It sets your body up, your blood sugar. Ooh, you cannot. It's just going to teaching people to try to do that, I think, is a recipe for mental disaster.
Yeah, I never got that when there's a lot of Instagram accounts like that about eating intuitively, and I was just like, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's too addictive for everything that I can't just eat a bite of an Oreo or something.
I know it truly is. It's addictive. The process that it sets off in your brain, you can't do that. It's like people don't like the analogy, but it really is. You can't tell an alcoholic to drink intuitively.
Yeah, just have one sip. Okay, sure. Um, all right, Michelle. Well, where can people find all your work and follow you and everything?
Yeah, so right now, I have my Instagram account, the @RunEatMeatRepeat, and hopefully soon I'll have a website, especially as I get closer to releasing my book. But that's the main one, and I appreciate people are welcome to follow me. I love questions. If you have questions, I'll do my best. Direct message me to get back to you as soon as possible. I do private consults. I am licensed to do private consults via phone. So if you're interested in getting started, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, and I just totally appreciate your time. It's just an honor to face to face with someone I admire so much. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for doing this. It's going to help a lot of people, and I know a lot of people will connect with your story. So, guys, please like this video, leave a thumbs up, share with a friend, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day. Bye.
Bye.